October 25, 1944, Philippine Sea. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers are sinking. Zuikaku, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack, rolls to port as her crew stands at attention on the flight deck. A bugler plays the Japanese national anthem as the ship disappears beneath the waves. These carriers carried barely 100 aircraft with poorly trained pilots. They posed almost no offensive threat to the American fleet. And yet, Vice Admiral Ozawa had deliberately sailed them into harm's way, launching aircraft specifically to ensure the Americans would find him. This wasn't incompetence. It was the plan. While Ozawa's carriers died in the north, the most powerful surface fleet Japan had ever assembled, including the super battleship Yamato with her 18.1-inch guns, was emerging from San Bernardino Strait, completely unopposed. And 200 miles to the south, a second Japanese force was preparing to thread through Surigao Strait. The Americans had been deceived. The trap was working. This is the story of how Japan, facing inevitable defeat, designed the most elaborate naval deception in history. A plan so audacious it required admirals to volunteer their ships as bait. A plan so desperate it could only work once. And a plan that, for a few crucial hours on October 25, 1944, actually succeeded. To understand how this happened, you need to understand why the Philippines mattered so much that both sides were willing to risk everything to control them. By mid-1942, the Japanese Empire stretched across the Pacific. From the home islands to Burma, from the Aleutians to New Guinea, it was the largest maritime empire in history. But this empire had a fatal vulnerability. Japan's economy depended entirely on resources it didn't have, specifically oil, rubber, tin, and bauxite from the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, and Borneo. Every drop of aviation fuel, every tank of diesel for the combined fleet, every tire for every truck, it all came from the south. And every shipment had to pass through the Philippines. Look at the geography. Ships leaving Borneo or Sumatra heading to Japan had essentially 2 routes: through the Philippine archipelago or thousands of miles around it through submarine-infested waters. Control the Philippines, and you control the lifeline of the Japanese war machine. The Naval History and Heritage Command put it simply: losing the Philippines would leave the Imperial Japanese Navy either in the north without fuel or in the south without ammunition. The Americans understood this perfectly, and for one man, retaking the Philippines was both strategic necessity and personal obsession: General Douglas MacArthur. On March 20, 1942, after evacuating Corregidor under presidential orders, MacArthur stood at a railway station in South Australia and made a promise to reporters: "I came through, and I shall return." He didn't say "we," he said "I." When Washington suggested changing it to "we shall return," MacArthur ignored them. This was personal. 90,000 American and Filipino troops had been left behind when MacArthur evacuated. They became prisoners. Many died in the Bataan Death March. MacArthur never forgot them, and he never let anyone else forget them either. But beyond the personal, MacArthur understood the strategic reality. The Philippines were the keystone of Japan's empire. Knock it out, and everything collapses. By mid-1944, American forces were closing in. Nimitz's Central Pacific Campaign had taken the Marshalls, the Marianas. MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Campaign had leapfrogged up New Guinea. The question wasn't whether Japan would lose the Philippines. The question was, would America bother to take them? Because in Washington there was a fierce debate. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, wanted to bypass the Philippines entirely and invade Formosa, modern-day Taiwan. It was closer to Japan, he argued. It would cut off the home islands from the south more effectively. Admiral Chester Nimitz initially agreed with King. MacArthur argued the opposite. He presented 3 arguments. First, the military argument. The Philippines could be invaded months earlier than Formosa. Speed mattered. Second, the moral argument. America had promised to liberate the Philippines. Bypassing them would be abandonment. Third, and this one was for President Roosevelt personally, the political argument. It was 1944, an election year. MacArthur reportedly told Roosevelt that bypassing the Philippines would cost him votes from Filipino Americans and anyone who believed America kept its promises. Whether this political calculation actually influenced Roosevelt is debated by historians. What's not debated is the outcome. In July 1944, Roosevelt met with MacArthur and Nimitz in Hawaii. He sided with MacArthur. The invasion of Leyte in the Philippines was scheduled for October 20, 1944. In Tokyo, Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters watched these preparations with growing alarm. They knew what was coming, and they knew they couldn't stop it. By October 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy was dying, not slowly, catastrophically. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the Americans called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese carrier aviation was destroyed as an effective force. The numbers tell the story. Japanese aircraft losses, 550, 645 planes. American aircraft losses, 123 planes. 3 Japanese carriers sunk, hundreds of Japan's best-trained pilots dead. The carriers that survived returned to port with almost empty decks. Training new pilots took 18 months. Japan didn't have 18 months. They didn't have 18 weeks. Admiral Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, faced an impossible situation. He had carriers with no aircraft worth mentioning. He had battleships and cruisers, powerful surface ships, but without air cover, they were sitting ducks for American carrier planes. He had submarines, but American anti-submarine warfare had become devastatingly effective, and most critically, he was running out of fuel. The oil fields in Borneo and Sumatra were still producing, but getting that oil to Japan was becoming impossible. American submarines were sinking tankers faster than Japan could build them. Some battleships and cruisers were actually stationed in Southeast Asian ports, closer to the oil, because there wasn't enough fuel to bring them back to Japan and then send them out again. Toyoda understood the mathematics of the situation. In a long war of attrition, Japan had already lost. The only question was how long it would take America to win. But there was one scenario, one narrow possibility, where Japan might change the equation. If they could destroy the American invasion fleet at Leyte, if they could sink the troop transports and supply ships, if they could make the Philippines invasion such a disaster that America would have to delay, to reconsider, to negotiate. It wouldn't win the war, but it might buy time. It might force a negotiated peace instead of unconditional surrender. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. In early 1944, before the Philippine Sea disaster, Toyoda had ordered his staff to develop contingency plans for defending Japan's inner empire. They were called Sho operations, victory operations, numbered for different scenarios: Sho-1, Philippines; Sho-2, Formosa and the Ryukyus; Sho-3, the Japanese home islands; Sho-4, the Kuriles. When it became clear the Americans were targeting Leyte, Toyoda activated Sho-1. The plan that emerged was audacious, complex, and required something no Navy had attempted before: using your own aircraft carriers as deliberate bait. To understand why this was necessary, you need to understand the American command structure in the Pacific. There were 2 separate American fleets operating in the Philippines area. The 3rd Fleet, under Admiral William Bull Halsey, reported to Admiral Nimitz at Pearl Harbor. Halsey's job was offensive operations, destroy the enemy fleet. The 7th Fleet, under Vice Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, reported to General MacArthur. Kinkaid's job was supporting the invasion, protect the landing forces. 2 fleets, 2 chains of command, no unified commander in the Philippines theater. The Japanese understood this, and they designed Sho-1 to exploit it. The concept was simple: in theory. While MacArthur's invasion force was landing at Leyte, Japanese surface forces would attack from two directions. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, the most powerful, would come from the west, transit San Bernardino Strait north of Leyte, and attack from the north. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force would come through Surigao Strait from the south. A pincer. The invasion fleet would be caught between them. But there was an enormous problem with this plan: Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet. Halsey had 9 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, and 6 fast battleships. Over 1,000 aircraft. If Halsey's carriers found the Japanese surface forces in daylight, they would be annihilated, just like Musashi would be, just like every Japanese surface force without air cover had been annihilated since 1942. So how do you get powerful surface forces past the most powerful carrier fleet ever assembled? You give them something they can't resist: carriers. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded Japan's remaining carrier force. In October 1944, that meant fleet carrier Zuikaku light carriers, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda hybrid battleship carriers Ise and Hyuga, about 108 aircraft with poorly trained pilots. Offensively, this force was useless. Defensively, it was invaluable, because American doctrine held one principle above all others: carriers must be destroyed. This wasn't just doctrine, it was instinct, hammered home by years of Pacific warfare. At Coral Sea, at Midway, at the Philippine Sea, the side that destroyed the enemy carriers won the battle. Halsey, in particular, had built his entire reputation on aggressive carrier warfare. So the plan was this: Ozawa would sail from Japan, deliberately expose his carriers, and lure Halsey north, away from San Bernardino Strait. While Halsey chased carriers that couldn't hurt him, Kurita's battleships and cruisers would pass through San Bernardino Strait unopposed and fall on the unprotected invasion fleet. It required precise timing. It required Ozawa to successfully attract American attention. It required Kurita to reach Leyte Gulf before Halsey could return. And it required admirals to volunteer for what was, essentially, a suicide mission. Ozawa understood exactly what he was being asked to do: sacrifice 4 carriers, including Zuikaku, the last surviving carrier from the Pearl Harbor attack, to give Kurita a chance. He accepted the mission without hesitation. Kurita was given the center force, the strongest surface fleet Japan had assembled since Midway: super battleships, Yamato and Musashi battleships, Nagato, Kongo, Haruna 10, heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 15 destroyers. If this force reached the invasion transports, the carnage would be catastrophic. Vice Admiral Nishimura's southern force was older and weaker: battleships Fuso and Yamashiro, both over 30 years old. Heavy cruiser Mogami 4 destroyers. They would attack through Surigao Strait, a narrow passage where American defenses would be strongest. Everyone knew this force was unlikely to survive. Nishimura knew it too. He went anyway. On October 18, 1944, Toyoda sent the order to execute Sho-1. On October 22, Kurita's center force sortied from Brunei Bay. On October 23, Ozawa's northern force sortied from Japan. On October 24, Nishimura's southern force began its approach to Surigao Strait. And on October 20th, Douglas MacArthur had waded ashore at Leyte and spoken into a radio microphone: "People of the Philippines, I have returned." The trap was being set. October 23, 1944. The Cabajasu Palawan Passage, west of the Philippines. At 0032 hours, USS Darter, an American submarine on patrol, detected Kurita's center force heading east. At 0532, Darter fired 6 torpedoes at heavy cruiser Otago, Kurita's flagship. 4 hit. Otago sank in 19 minutes. Kurita was forced to swim before being rescued. Minutes later, Darter's sister submarine, USS Dace, hit heavy cruiser Maya with 4 torpedoes. Maya exploded and sank. 2 heavy cruisers gone before the battle even began. But Kurita pressed on. He transferred his flag to the super battleship Yamato and continued east. October 24th, the Sibuyan Sea. At WW2, American search aircraft spotted Kurita's force. Admiral Halsey's response was immediate. "Strike! Repeat! Strike! Good luck!" What followed was 5 hours of continuous air attacks. Wave after wave of Helldivers, Avengers, and Hellcats. The super battleship Musashi, Yamato's sister ship, the most powerfully armed battleship ever built, became the focus of the American assault. Musashi displaced 72,800 tons. Her armor belt was 16 inches thick. Her deck armor ranged from 7.9 to 9.1 inches. She mounted 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever installed on a warship. She was designed to be unsinkable. First wave, 1025. 1 bomb, 1 torpedo. Second wave, 1200. 2 bombs, 3 torpedoes. Third wave, 1331. 4 bombs, 4 torpedoes. Fourth wave, 1500. 4 bombs, 3 torpedoes. Fifth wave, 1525. 13 bombs, 11 torpedoes. The exact count is disputed. Pilots overclaimed hits, as they always did. Japanese records suggest perhaps 11 torpedoes and 10 bombs actually struck. Even at the lower estimate, it was devastating. Musashi's speed dropped from 27 knots to 6 knots. Her rudder jammed. Her list became uncontrollable. At 1935, she capsized and sank, taking 1,023 men with her, including her captain, who chose to go down with his ship. But here's what matters. American pilots reported Kurita's entire force as heavily damaged and retiring. At 1530, Kurita had indeed temporarily turned west, away from San Bernardino Strait. Halsey believed the center force was neutralized, no longer a threat. He was wrong. At 1714, when the air attacks finally stopped, Kurita turned his force east again, back toward San Bernardino Strait. He sent a message to Tokyo. Were we to have forced our way through as scheduled under these circumstances, we would merely make of ourselves meat for the enemy. But he didn't wait for a reply. He kept sailing east. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the north, Vice Admiral Ozawa was becoming frustrated. His mission was to be detected, to be the bait, to lure Halsey north. But American search planes weren't finding him. So at 11:45 on October 24th, Ozawa did something unprecedented. He launched 76 aircraft specifically to attract attention. Not to attack, to be seen. He sent them south toward the American carriers. Most were shot down. That was expected. The point was to make sure American combat air patrols tracked them back to their source. It worked. At 1640, an American search aircraft finally spotted Ozawa's carriers, approximately 210 nautical miles east of Cape Engano. The report reached Halsey's flagship. Now Halsey faced the decision that would define his career and haunt him for the rest of his life. To the west, Kurita's force in the Sibuyan Sea reported as damaged and retreating. To the north, Japanese carriers, the ultimate prize, the target American naval doctrine said must be destroyed above all else. To the south, Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, protecting the invasion. Halsey's orders from Admiral Nimitz were clear. In case opportunity for destruction of major portion of the enemy fleet offer or can be created, such destruction becomes the primary task. Halsey was also acutely aware that Admiral Spruance had been criticized for not aggressively pursuing Japanese carriers at the Battle of the Philippine Sea 3 months earlier. Critics called it overcautious. Halsey wasn't going to make that mistake. At 2,000 hours on October 24th, Halsey made his decision. He would take his entire 3rd Fleet north to attack Ozawa's carriers. All 9 fleet carriers, all 8 light carriers, all 6 fast battleships, every cruiser and destroyer of Task Force 38. The Naval History and Heritage Command's assessment is blunt. Not so much as a picket destroyer was left at San Bernardino Strait. Earlier that day, at 1512, Halsey had sent a message about forming Task Force 34, a surface action group of fast battleships to guard San Bernardino Strait if needed. But the wording was critical. The message said, Task Force 34 will be formed, not is formed. Admiral Kinkaid, commanding 7th Fleet, read this message and assumed Task Force 34 had already been formed and was guarding the strait. Admiral Nimitz at Pearl Harbor read it the same way. Admiral King in Washington read it the same way. Everyone assumed Halsey had left a powerful surface force to guard San Bernardino Strait. In reality, San Bernardino Strait was completely unguarded. And at 0300 on October 25th, Kurita's center force, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers passed through the strait unopposed. Ozawa's sacrifice mission had succeeded perfectly. Dawn, October 25, 1944. The strategic situation. North, Halsey's entire 3rd Fleet is 300 miles away, bearing down on Ozawa's carriers. East, Kurita's powerful center force has emerged from San Bernardino Strait and is heading south along the coast of Samar. South, Nishimura's southern force is approaching Surigao Strait, where it's about to be annihilated, but that's another story. Center, the American invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf, protected only by Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, mostly older battleships and slow escort carriers. And between Kurita's battleships and the invasion fleet, Taffy 3, 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. The most powerful surface fleet Japan had assembled since Midway was about to encounter the weakest American naval force in the Philippines. This was exactly what Sho-1 had been designed to achieve. At Do 637, Ensign William C. Brooks, flying anti-submarine patrol from escort carrier Fanshawe Bay, spotted ships to the northwest. His report was initially disbelieved. Then he transmitted, "I can see pagoda masts. I see the biggest meatball flag on the biggest battleship I ever saw." Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, commanding Taffy 3, realized immediately what was happening, and he knew his force had no chance. Yamato alone displaced 72,800 tons. All 6 of Sprague's escort carriers together displaced 60,000 tons. Yamato could make 27 knots. The escort carriers maxed out at 18 knots, and that was in perfect conditions. Yamato's 18.1-inch guns could fire a 3,200-pound shell over 25 miles. The escort carrier's biggest guns were 5-inch, unable to penetrate Japanese cruiser armor, let alone battleship plating. At 0658, Yamato opened fire on a surface target for the first and only time in her career. The battle off Samar had begun, and it will be the subject of the next documentary in this series. But for understanding the Sho-Go plan, what matters is this. For 2.5 hours on the morning of October 25, 1944, the plan was working. Ozawa had successfully lured Halsey away. Kurita had reached the invasion area. The way to Leyte Gulf was open. If Kurita had pressed his attack, if he had driven straight for the invasion transports, the American loss of life and material would have been catastrophic. Ships filled with supplies, troops still landing, no air cover, no heavy ships nearby. It would have been a massacre. But at 0920, with victory seemingly within grasp, Kurita ordered his fleet to withdraw. Why? This question has haunted historians for 80 years. Kurita gave various explanations over the years. He thought he was fighting fleet carriers, not escort carriers. He never received confirmation that Ozawa's decoy had worked. He received false reports of another carrier force to the northeast. His communications with other Japanese forces had broken down. He was exhausted, 3 days without sleep. His ships were scattered by the running fight with Taffy 3. He feared being trapped in Leyte Gulf's confined waters. He believed most invasion transports had already unloaded. In his final years, Kurita admitted to a friend, "I made a mistake from exhaustion." At 0920, Kurita turned north, away from Leyte Gulf. By 0930, Halsey, finally responding to desperate messages from Kinkaid, had turned south with his fast battleships, racing to intercept Kurita. By 2100 that night, Kurita had retreated back through San Bernardino Strait. Halsey's battleships arrived at the strait at 1100 on October 26th, hours too late. They found nothing. In the north, Ozawa had watched American carrier aircraft destroy his fleet. Light carrier Chitos sunk at 0937. Light carrier Toyoda dead in the water by 10:18, later finished by cruiser gunfire. Light carrier Zuiho sunk in the afternoon. And Zuikaku, the last survivor of the 6 carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor. Multiple attack waves, progressive damage. At 10:32, Ozawa transferred his flag to cruiser Oyoto. Captain Takeo Kaizuka ordered the survivors to the flight deck. He addressed them, told them the ship would soon sink. As they prepared to abandon ship, the ensign was lowered. A bugler played the national anthem. At 14:14, Zuikaku rolled to port and sank stern first, taking Kaizuka and 843 men with her. Ozawa had accomplished his mission. He had drawn Halsey north. He had kept the Third Fleet engaged for hours. But because Kurita withdrew, the sacrifice achieved nothing. So what happened at Leyte Gulf? From a purely tactical perspective, the Sho-Go plan succeeded brilliantly in its first phase. Ozawa's decoy mission worked perfectly. Halsey took the bait. San Bernardino Strait was left unguarded. Kurita reached the invasion area unopposed. The Americans were deceived. The Japanese executed a complex, 3-pronged operation with precise timing across hundreds of miles of ocean. For a brief window on October 25th, Japan had achieved exactly what the plan called for: a powerful surface force attacking an undefended invasion fleet. But the plan failed in its ultimate objective. Kurita withdrew without reaching the transports. And even if Kurita had pressed on, historians debate whether it would have changed the war's outcome. By October 1944, American industrial capacity was overwhelming. The U.S. was producing 1 fleet carrier every 2 months, Japan's entire 1944 naval construction, 1 escort carrier, American aircraft production, 96,000 planes in 1944, Japanese aircraft production, 28,000 planes in 1944, American submarine force, decimating Japanese merchant marine. The hard truth is that Japan had already lost the war. The only questions were when and at what cost. Admiral Toyoda and his staff knew this. The Sho-Go plan wasn't designed to win the war. It was designed to, 1. Inflict such damage that America might negotiate rather than demand unconditional surrender. 2. Buy time, weeks, months, to prepare better defenses. 3. Demonstrate to the Japanese people and military that the Navy was still fighting, still relevant. Even partial success might have achieved these objectives. If Kurita had reached Leyte Gulf and sunk even a fraction of the transports and supply ships, MacArthur's invasion would have stalled. Troops ashore would have run short of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The American advance would have been delayed, maybe by weeks, maybe by months. The Emperor and Japanese leadership might have had additional time to consider ending the war before Iwo Jima, before Okinawa, before the atomic bombs. We can never know. What we do know is that Leyte Gulf exposed critical flaws in both navies. For the Americans, the divided command structure, Halsey reporting to Nimitz, Kinkaid reporting to MacArthur, created dangerous gaps in coordination. This would be fixed in future operations, but at Leyte Gulf it nearly proved catastrophic. The miscommunication about Task Force 34 revealed how easily assumptions can replace clear orders in the chaos of battle. And the ease with which Ozawa's decoy worked demonstrated that even dominant forces can be maneuvered by a clever, desperate enemy. For the Japanese, Leyte Gulf proved that without air power, surface ships, even super battleships like Yamato and Musashi, were fatally vulnerable. Musashi absorbed incredible punishment before sinking, but sink she did. All the armor in the world couldn't save her from repeated carrier airstrikes. The battle also revealed the limits of complex, precision-timed operations across vast distances with degraded communications. Everything had to go perfectly. When Kurita was delayed in the Sibuyan Sea, when communications failed, the entire plan's timing collapsed. The battle's ultimate impact was strategic. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost. 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, 9 11 destroyers, over 10,500 men. More importantly, they lost the ability to conduct offensive operations. The remaining ships returned to base and stayed there. Fuel shortages and the absence of air cover made further major operations impossible. Japan's only remaining option was kamikaze attacks, sacrificing pilots and planes in suicide missions because conventional combat was no longer sustainable. For MacArthur, Leyte Gulf secured his return to the Philippines. The invasion succeeded. Within months, Manila would be liberated. The sea lanes from Southeast Asia to Japan were effectively cut. Japan's oil imports dropped by 80% after Leyte Gulf. The war machine began to starve. So was Sho-Go a brilliant plan or a desperate gamble? Both. Admiral Toyoda and his staff designed the most sophisticated naval deception operation of World War II. Using carriers as deliberate bait was unprecedented. Coordinating 3 separate forces across hundreds of miles required extraordinary planning. Vice Admiral Ozawa executed his sacrificial mission flawlessly. He did exactly what was asked of him, knowing it would cost him his ships and possibly his life. Vice Admiral Kurita brought the most powerful surface force Japan could assemble through submarine attacks, airstrikes, and navigational challenges to reach his objective. The plan worked up to the moment when Kurita had to decide whether to complete the mission. His decision to withdraw has been debated for 8 decades. Was it exhaustion, confusion, prudence, cowardice, wisdom? We may never fully understand what went through Kurita's mind in that moment, but we can understand the plan itself, ambitious, audacious, and ultimately unable to change the mathematics of a war Japan had already lost. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was the largest naval engagement in history. Over $200,000 personnel, 282 warships, combat across 100,000 square miles of ocean, 4 major battles in 3 days, the Sibuyan Sea, Surigao Strait, Cape Engano, and Samar. Each will be covered in detail in the subsequent documentaries in this series. But the battle began here, with strategy, with a plan so desperate it required admirals to volunteer their ships as sacrifices. With a calculated deception that actually worked, Japan's gamble failed. But for a few hours on October 25, 1944, it almost succeeded. And in the chaos and carnage that followed, ordinary sailors performed acts of extraordinary courage that would become legend.